So Alabama Power was aiming to build a hydro pump storage facility on Chandler Mountain in a rural
Build a what?
community.
Hold on, what? Hey everyone, welcome to the Set in Stone podcast. Welcome to our series called The South Got Something to Say, where we are digging deep into Southern politics, Southern grassroots movement, and just learning more about the communities that are trying to ignite change across Alabama. Today I have the absolute honor of speaking with Cindy Lowry, the Executive Director of the Alabama Rivers Alliance. So thank you so much, Cindy, for coming on. Before we get into our conversation, I want to read your bio off and allow people the opportunity to get to know who you are. So Cindy has been the executive director of Alabama Rivers Alliance since 2007. She was promoted to the leadership position after serving 2 years as watershed leadership coordinator. And in that role, Cindy met and rallied with river protectors all across Alabama and developed a truly remarkable ability to see all the many moving pieces and gather them together to craft strategic plans for statewide advocacy. She grew up in Aniana, right? Mm-hmm. Oh, look at me. Near the Locust Fork River. She followed in her family's footsteps and went to Auburn University, where she earned her BS degree in wildlife science. She spent some time after graduation in the Appalachia, serving rural communities by helping to weatherize homes and leading volunteers. Cindy returned to Alabama, where she earned her master's in public administration from UAB. And Cindy's thesis was about citizen participation in public policy, and she continues to advocate for public participation in policy development and for transparency and justice from our decision makers. She developed her foundation for all things nonprofit while serving as a development assistant at the Alabama Wildlife Center before finding her place in the river movement. Now, with more than 20 years' experience in the conservation nonprofit sector, Cindy has received many awards and special recognition for her dedicated work, including Wonderful Outstanding Woman from the Metro Birmingham branch of the NAACP, one of the women who shaped Alabama, who shaped the state from AL.com, Alumni Spirit of Sustainability Award from Auburn University, and more. She's also been inducted in the UAB's MPA Hall of Fame. In her free time, she continues advocating and providing her leadership and expertise, and she is the former president of the board of directors for Alabama Rise and a longtime member of the board of directors for the Friends of Locust Fork River. She also served as president of the League of Women's Voters of Greater Birmingham's board of directors, and she's an active member of Alabama Forward. She decompresses by watching Hallmark movies in winter, running on Birmingham's awesome urban trails, and spending time outdoors with her husband. So, Cindy, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
What a load.
It's funny to hear somebody just talk about myself like that
Really?
for that long. So.
Yeah, no, you've just accomplished so much. So thank you for the work that you continue to do in this environmental space. So thank you for that.
I'm always, it's my dream job, my dream life so far. So I'm honored to just get to work with the people that I work with. And I wouldn't have been able to do any of that without all the people that I work with along the way.
Yeah, I love that. So can we start off by you explaining Alabama Rivers Alliance and what that work means for our state?
Gladly. So the Alabama Rivers Alliance is a network of local community-based groups, river-focused organizations like Friends of the Locust Fork River, you mentioned there. There's Friends of the Creek groups all over the state, and watershed, like whole river system-based organizations like the River Keepers. Mm-hmm. So River Keepers are a specific type of organization that are affiliated with a big national Waterkeeper Alliance group, and they focus on a territory of the river system, like the whole Coosa or the whole Black Warrior, the whole Mobile Bay Keeper. Mm-hmm. And then there's the Friends of groups and community-based organizations that care about something dealing with their water in their community. Okay. So as a network, our founding members founded us in the mid-'90s because there were some river groups popping up, like the Cahaba River Society was the first one, mm-hmm. and other small groups popping up, and they saw a need for a statewide organization to support those local groups and what they were trying to do, and to bring a statewide focus, looking at state-level policy mm-hmm. at the legislature or regulatory reforms at EPA and the Department of Environmental management. So keeping that state focus, leading those state policy initiatives while supporting that, what I guess we call the boots on the ground workers in the communities and in the watersheds to look out for their local waterways.
Yeah.
And that's what we do still today. It's a very important part of our mission to make sure that the local community groups are supported and strong enough, because we can't, as a small statewide organization, we can't be in every waterway at all the time.
Yeah.
And know what's going on in every community. So it's really helpful to have this network and this alliance working together and moving collectively when we need it at the state level.
Absolutely. Okay, so you mentioned a few rivers, Locust, Fork, Cahaba. How many rivers do we have in Alabama? Do you know?
I do.
Okay, how many?
Well,
how many do
I
we
didn't
have?
come up with this number, but the scientists did. But there are actually over 132,000 miles of rivers and streams in Alabama.
Wow.
So I won't say I know exactly how many rivers and creeks we have, but I know how many miles of rivers and
Yeah.
streams we have. It's a lot of water.
It is.
And we have about, depending on how you divide it, that we have about 14 major watersheds. We use that term. It's the entire basin of the river where the water drains into that major system.
Okay.
And those are those big ones I mentioned. You've got the Tennessee, the Tombigbee, the Black Warrior, the Coosa, the Tallapoosa, the Cahaba, the Alabama, and you've got some smaller ones in the southeast, the Choctawhatchee. So there's a lot to be protected here.
Yeah, it
We're
is.
also, you know, my favorite stat we share with people wherever we are is that we rank number 1 in freshwater biodiversity in the entire country.
Really?
Yes. So, and I'm sure, in case any of your listeners don't know what that means, we have more species of fish, snails, turtles, I'm blanking, crayfish, and mussels, freshwater mussels, than any other species. There's more species of fish in the Cahaba River than in the entire state of California.
That is insane.
So
that kind of blows my mind.
Yeah, so we have all of this to protect.
Yeah, we do. We really do.
And it's not just about the critters. I mean, over half of our population in Alabama gets their drinking water from our rivers and streams.
That was going to be my next question. Like, how much drinking water do we get?
So, the last time we looked at the data, which may be different now because there's, you know, some parts of the state use groundwater, but in many places in the state, and I don't want to get too in the weeds, but in many places in the state, our groundwater and our what we call our surface water, which is the water in rivers and streams, are connected. So, like, if the groundwater table goes down, sometimes the river and stream base level goes down as well.
Wow.
So when you say they're getting it from, like 55% of the population gets their water from drinking from rivers and streams, even if they get it from groundwater, and oftentimes these two sort of resources are connected.
Oh, wow. Okay, so when you say it's a lot to protect here, can we talk about, like, the threats, the most threatening things to Alabama's rivers right now?
Yeah, I mean, I thought about this question when I saw it, and I was like, yeah, there's so many different things, and it kind of depends on where you are in the state, what your sort of focus might be. But I think from the way that I think is kind of big picture and certainly policy oriented. And I think probably the biggest threat, at least in the time that I've been working in this area, is it's really the political culture of seeing these rivers and streams and water resources as something for us to use and not something that we are really investing in the protection of.
Yeah.
And so that comes from the state leadership, and then it trickles down to people because there's not a sense of urgency like there are in some places because we have so much water.
Yeah.
Most people maybe not look out their front door, but they can not. It doesn't take too much of a journey in Alabama to find a creek or a forest of trees or or nature itself. So we're not in a position where, like out west, they have so little water, they've dried up a lot of their streams, so there's more of a sense of urgency there.
Yeah.
But the problem with that sort of lack of urgency is that we don't then invest in the planning and the thinking for how we're going to make sure that we don't end up in the position that other places have found themselves,
Yeah.
depleting our resources to the point that we can't just take them for granted anymore.
Yeah.
So because we have a lot doesn't mean we don't need to protect it.
Yeah, can you talk about, I guess, like, I don't know when you say the West have dried up their rivers, what has caused them to do that, and, like, what are preventative measures we can do?
Well,
to
so
not
they
get there?
they didn't ever have quite as much water as we did.
Okay. Yeah.
I mean, it's a drier environment. They have more desert habitat, and
Yeah.
but like the Colorado River Basin, which it flows through multiple states, like almost the entire western states. It flows all the way down to Mexico. They've used it so much without thinking or planning and they built a lot of development. They built a lot of population and manipulated the water systems to the point that there's now not as much as there was, and they have huge droughts. They have way more restrictive water regulations. So they have a whole different set of laws in the West for how they manage water use than we do.
Okay.
It's probably a little weedy to get into for this conversation, but like out West, it's called prior appropriation. Okay. If you got there first, then you got to use the water. And that goes all the way back to like the settlers, like way long time ago out West.
So like Native Americans was there first, or
well, not if you were Native American.
Okay, no, then
so certainly they never get people that aren't in power never get the long end of the stick. Right?
Yeah. Okay.
So it was more like pioneers that came out and sort of settled on the land, and I can't give you the date of when the prior appropriations laws started, but that was kind of how they dealt with it out there. And so now they still have this tiered system of water rights, basically. It's called senior water rights, and then you have next tier down and next tier down for how they manage their water. And we on the east of the Mississippi, because we always had a lot more water, we've operated historically under the common law riparian system, which is Old English law, which says if you own the land next to the water, you get to use it, as long as the use is beneficial. But
this doesn't mean this means whoever, when you say who owns the land by the water, I immediately thought about lake houses. So I'm like, people that have homes on the lake.
You're asking me some really good questions. It get really complicated here.
Okay, well, I'm cool with complicated.
So all the lakes in Alabama are dammed up rivers.
Okay.
So we don't have natural lakes here. Some, places do, like, the Great Lakes in Minnesota and Wisconsin, places like that have these natural lakes, but ours are all rivers that were flowing and like you would picture a river system, but then they put a concrete dam in it, and it slowed down the water and held it back and made a big lake.
Got you.
So the entity that made that lake, in a lot of cases in Alabama, is Alabama Power.
Okay.
They created those. They created the dams for hydropower and flood control, and the lakes behind them are. There's a lot of semantics about whether they would say they're owned by the Alabama Power, but they are certainly controlled by Alabama Power. Okay. So if you want to put a dock in on Lake Martin, you have to work with Alabama Power to do that.
Okay.
There's a little bit of sort of nuance about who actually owns that water. And if you want to pull water out of it and use it for drinking water, like a city or something, you have to actually pay them for the kilowatt hour of power that they don't generate from that water.
So, and this is so mind-boggling to me because I grew up on Lake Martin. Like, I had friends whose folks had lake houses, so like every summer I would spend my time there, and I just thought it was so much more. I always thought it was better, but now, like, you got rules and regulations to land that I pay for, and if I want to go get water off the water, I can't go do that. Like, I have to get permission.
Yeah.
So what was that rule, the common law rule that we...
Well, so what a lot of states have gone to is called regulated riparian.
Okay.
And what that means is that there's a state agency or, state body that has a little bit of authority over sort of making sure that so say you're a farmer in the Black Belt and you don't own any land next to the water.
Yeah.
You can't go get water out of that river and irrigate your crops with it because you don't own that water. And so you might have to jump over another landowner, and that would be unlawful. But if there were regulated riparian permit, that means usually that ends up being permitting for water withdrawals. So you have to go and get a permit for how much water you want to take out of the system. But also there has to be some kind of, and this is where we come in as the environmental groups. If you're going to permit a water system, which is what most states do now, I don't know, I can't give you the numbers, but Alabama has no permitting for water withdrawals. If you own the land, you just can withdraw that water. But what most states do is a permitting system. What we really would like to see in Alabama is if we create this permitting system, which we will need to eventually to coordinate and manage the water, we have to also have some regulations or some standards for how much water we leave in the river. Because you don't want to
Okay.
permit it all out, which is kind of what they've done out west. They permit it all
Yeah.
out
Okay.
so that then the rivers go dry, or at least maybe they go dry, part of the year when you're pumping out for irrigation or whatever it is you're using it for.
Yeah.
Another interesting factoid that you might be surprised by is that, what would you think our largest water use is in Alabama? Water withdrawal is in Alabama for?
I don't know, sewage. I don't know much about the water system.
So right now, as of the latest data, 80% of our water withdrawals, like the water we're taking out of the rivers, is
Yeah.
for cooling coal and nuclear power plants and gas and power plants to create electricity. Now, a lot of that water gets put back in. A lot of it evaporates, or some of it evaporates, but a lot of it gets put back in, and it's warmer, and there's things we can get into with water quality issues there. But it takes that much water, billions of gallons of water a day, to create electricity with fossil fuels
That's crazy.
and with nuclear power. So
are we
don't really irrigate that much in Alabama. Most states, you ask them what their largest water use is, they're going to say agriculture irrigation, but that's not the case here.
That's not the case. Okay, so I have a question. It might be too deep. But if we're using that much water, why is the fight against solar panels a thing? And we could save on how much water we're using because of the work that you all are doing for permitting how much water we take out, right? Am I asking the right question?
Yes.
Okay.
So this is where sort of our work really, a lot of people don't think of water as the climate. When you think of climate issues, you think of air quality, you think of energy, but this is where it intersects, right? The water we're using to create our energy right now is a lot. And as we think about where we're going to go for the future, we want to decarbonize, but we also want to make sure that we're not relying on energy sources that use huge amounts of water, because we're probably going to need that for other things.
Exactly.
So the solar and wind tend to use a lot less water. There's some life cycle. People could come and argue, like, to make a solar panel, you might have to use a little water in the manufacturing. I don't know that level of detail.
Yeah, me either.
But I do know that just from a generation standpoint, creating the energy, they use virtually no water. So from a water standpoint, there's certainly a better choice. Now, some people think of hydropower as a clean energy, and so I can get into a little bit of a trail there if you're interested. But we mentioned the dams earlier. So dams have completely altered our river systems.
Okay.
They caused huge mass extinctions in the last century, the mid 1900s, when they built the dams because of, remember I told you about all those snails and fish, and mussels particularly, snails and mussels in particular need flowing water and certain habitats. And when you put a dam in a river, you change it from this flowing system that may have shoals and riffles and things like that to a lake where it's just deep standing water.
Yeah.
So it just changes the whole ecosystem. And so we had a mass extinction of species when those dams were put in, and it's why river groups are really we don't support building any new dams, certainly. And we at the Rivers Alliance have participated in hydropower relicensing on all the major river systems for over 2 decades now.
Oh, wow.
Because in the relicensing process, which is a federal process under the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, there's a really great public participation process where we can have a say, or at least try to have a say, in how the system operates, how the dam operates, so that at least if they're not going to take the dam out, because they need that flood control, they need that hydropower, and people want those lakes to recreate on, then we try to make it where they at least operate the system and generate the power in a way that doesn't just destroy downstream habitats or flood downstream landowners or erode land downstream. And there are some things that we know now about how things were done, 50 years ago, 40, 50 years ago, that we can do better now.
Yeah.
And it may cost a little money for the power company to put in these new ways of getting water through the dams, but they're essential for bettering the habitat downstream. We can't necessarily get it back the way it was without taking the dam out, but we can certainly improve it.
Yeah.
And so that's what we've been working on. And it's also why when we talk about renewable energy and clean energy, we've also been working with some research across the country and really across the globe that is showing that reservoirs emit methane. In some cases, they emit methane gases, like on par with coal.
Wow.
So they're not exactly carbon free, but where they or I should say greenhouse gas free. But we just try to educate people about that. That hydropower is not necessarily the answer. At least large scale hydropower and damming up rivers is not really the answer for renewable energy. And less than 10% of our power in Alabama comes from that.
Yeah.
So we don't.
Less than 10% comes from that. Less than 10%.
Less than 10% comes from hydro, even though it dammed up most of our major river systems to create it.
Wow. So one time I was taking a back road because it was heavy traffic going to Birmingham to Montgomery, and I took the back road to Calera, and it's like, do you know what I'm talking about? I think it's a dam, but it has the most beautiful water I've ever seen in Alabama. It's like very blue, very clear. You know what I'm talking about? It might be a what?
It might be a quarry.
What is that?
I mean, I don't know exactly where you're talking about specifically, but so rock quarries are that's an industry. Like Vulcan's the big one from Alabama. Vulcan Industries are based in Alabama. I think they're national, but it's where they excavate rocks from the earth to create roads and homes and all the different things depending on what kind of rock it is they make out of rocks. And they can be pretty destructive in a community because like the one that I toured looks like basically like the Grand. I mean, it's not as big as the Grand Canyon, but exaggeratingly, it looks like it's just a big giant hole in the ground. But once they hit the water table, then that water comes up and it's very blue. And
yes, I think so.
Usually it may be the limestone or something about the rock, but they tend to be real blue. So that's did it have like rocks all around it?
Yeah, it did.
Yeah,
it did. Was. Yeah.
But usually they're still excavating around on the upper levels, but once they hit the water table, they can't get excavating more, and then they have to go, keep doing the top layer and going wider and wider, or go somewhere else. And that's another thing we have a lot of in Alabama is rocks.
Wow. So in those rocks, it's gonna be water. Is basically what.
Eventually, you just dig deep enough, you're gonna hit water in most places.
Wow. So. Okay. I have a lot to think about here, for real. Can you talk about the Alabama Water Plan?
Yes.
You all have.
So when we're talking about all these issues we've been talking about, and it gets a little overwhelming and complicated, but the one thing that we can do in Alabama and that we've started, but we need to get back to it, is developing as planning for how we're going to manage our water resources going forward.
Yeah.
So again, we have a lot. We're not running out right now, but when we have droughts like we've been having this fall, there are certain places that really do struggle, and there are certain like farmers and things like that can really have. You get a drought for 2 weeks in the summer, and a farmer's going to be in trouble depending on what their crop is, with their ability they might lose their crop. So, and there's lots of industries in Alabama that rely heavily on lots of water, and then of course there's all of us that recreate, drink water, all these things.
Right.
So planning for our water future and how we're going to make sure that's secure and that's sustainable. It's very important, and while we need to do it while we're not in crisis, so this is a good time to do it. While we know things are coming, the state is recruiting for these huge data centers right now. There's a lot of those coming into Alabama. Meta, Google, they use a lot of water in their operations too. So what other states have done, our neighbors in Georgia did it, back in the early 2000s, is put together the agencies that deal with water and stakeholders and industries that have a stake in water, and have a planning process to get to a water plan. And in our, we've advocated for this for decades, and we got some momentum, believe it or not, under Governor Bentley, who kind of kicked off a process to develop recommendations for a plan. And over about a 4 or 5 year process, we moved forward a little bit. We got some research, some reports came out from state agencies that were called the AWAG, the Alabama Water Agencies Working Group, which was the 5 state agencies that deal with water in various ways. And they put together some recommendations. We worked with them and got stakeholders together. And things were moving forward. And then, of course, what happened to Governor Bentley. He had scandal and got kicked out of office or resigned. So then Governor Ivey came in, and whether she just doesn't care about water or she just didn't want to do anything Governor Bentley was doing. I can't say which, maybe a little bit of both, but she just hasn't championed it. She just kind of shut the process down and hasn't championed it.
Yeah.
And moving forward, we're we're continuing to try to figure out how do we get that conversation going again.
Yeah.
There is a permanent joint legislative committee on water policy and management that hasn't met in years.
Yeah.
We continue to try to get them moving again.
Yeah.
There's things that are moving along in the academic institutions and the agencies that really we haven't just stopped in our tracks. Think kind of piecemeal things moving along, but we need to put that back together in a statewide conversation. And for us, what it means is, as I mentioned, some kind of accountability for water use. So probably a permitting system is what that ends up looking like. Mm-hmm. Some kind of standards and that we keep certain amounts of. We know how much water we need to keep in the streams, and we do that. We protect that to protect the streams themselves from collapse, but to protect critters that need it, and downstream users, and all those things that keeping some water in the streams will do. So don't permit it all out. We call that in-stream flow policy.
Yeah.
And then some water conservation and efficiency incentives and measures, some regional structures so that watershed-based decision-making can happen, not just like somebody at the state level deciding everything. I mean, the local communities need to have say in how this, in sort of the information that feeds up to that state level body.
Absolutely.
Those are the things we think are important in a water plan.
Yeah. So for this next session, I guess, like, what does that look like for y'all? What is
so for us
the
right
permitting
now,
y'all's like number one focus, or like what is that?
Well, so for us right now, it's kind of this like drumbeat underlying like everything we do, but there's no real door avenue for just pushing it forward. But we worked last session to try to get some of that committee reappointed, because it's not one of the committees that like is active and votes on bills during the session. It's a permanent committee that meets and discusses things and learns things and then recommends bills. And since they haven't met in years, it's important that they get reappointed. Like whoever's supposed to be on it, they have certain criteria for who's on it and who appoints them.
Yeah.
So we worked and we got 2 appointments last year from Lieutenant Governor Ainsworth to the committee, but there's still some that need to be made by the Speaker of the House.
Okay.
And then, so we're going to be continuing to advocate for that committee to get reconstituted and to meet and kind of catch up on what's happened and talk about where we can go forward. And then we're also planning down the road for whoever the next governor is to try to, 2026 will be the next big election cycle for our state. And when will we, how can we influence those candidates as they run? And we're, as I said, we're a 501c3. We can't endorse candidates, but we want to educate everyone that runs on the importance of this issue so that whoever gets into office will be interested in being a champion or at least, getting back involved in this.
As far as just, finding new people, finding new allies to really push forward what we need as far as water management in Alabama.
I will say we have to continue to inform and engage our base too, our movement and our partners. There are a lot of issues. We haven't even really gotten into water quality issues and pollution, and so there's so much affecting individual communities and watersheds that we know that something this big and kind of long term is not easy to just take time to focus on.
Absolutely.
And so we want to continue to provide that support to our movement to continue to keep it in people's in people's minds and it's not like it's a piece of paper on a shelf that we can just say here's a water plan and approve it.
Yeah.
It's a process that we have to have.
Right, exactly.
So, and that we, it does matter that we have all the voices at the table to make the right process and the right plan, or it won't work for Alabama.
Right. I agree. And I'm glad you brought that up, because my next question was going to be like, who are the people that are affected by these various water issues? And I guess like what part of the state do they live in? Is this like rural community? Is this people that are in the city that are touching the water? Like, who are the people that are affected by this every day?
Well, I mean, if you're talking about the water quantity issues, sort of the water supply and water use issues, it really is statewide, and it's across the board. Any water issue, whether it's water quality or quantity, is going to impact, communities of low income, people of low income, and oftentimes people of color more than it impacts other people. And the way that I kind of talk about that from the water quantity standpoint is like whoever has the biggest pump at the top of the watershed is who has the advantage in this system.
Oh, wow.
And you're probably not the person that has the biggest pump or the entity that has the biggest pump at the top of the watershed if you're a low-income community or a low-income individual. And the only recourse right now to address it, if like somebody upstream puts a big giant irrigation system or there's a power plant upstream from you and they're withdrawing huge amounts of water, or just some landowner for some other reason, or a data center comes in and they're withdrawing huge amounts of water, and it's impacting you downstream, the only recourse you have is to sue. That's under the system that we have.
Dang.
You have to prove that their use is not beneficial in order to sue them. So that's a pretty big burden to put on anybody.
That is on anybody, yeah.
So a planning system that creates a little bit more of a structure, that there's a place where people can go. Here's an example of it's been hard to find a lot of examples because again, we have a lot of water. We're not in crisis mode right now with this.
Yeah.
I am on an advisory panel with some small farmers in the Black Belt, and they don't own the land. They don't all have access to irrigation. So if there is a drought, they're sort of at the mercy of the weather, and that's not necessarily as reliable as it used to be. But the more sort of potent example that we have is there's a gentleman in Columbiana who bought some land, and this is kind of it sounds a little more privileged problem, but this is kind of what you could see from any standpoint. Mm-hmm. He bought some land, and he he went there with his family. It's beautiful, and there's this beautiful creek on it that they love. And this is where they wanted to be. This is where they wanted to be with their family. Mm-hmm. He noticed one day that when he was just standing there, the water just started going down in the creek. Like, it was just like literally he could see the water just go. And this is a creek that's like, decent size across, and you could swim in it.
Yeah, how does that? Yeah.
And so he figured out that it was Columbiana Waterworks was using groundwater.
No.
But their system was spring fed, and his creek was spring fed, so it was competing with his creek. And now he did end up, going, and after years of advocating with the Waterworks and getting scientists to come in and prove that was happening, the Waterworks is working with him to address it and turn off that pump and try to find water elsewhere. But that's just the kind of thing.
That's crazy.
It took a lot of time and a lot of resources for him to deal with that.
It did.
And he didn't have a state agency he could go to or
literally
anywhere to say like, hey, help me here.
Yeah, and no shade, but capitalism. Dang. Shout out to capitalism. That's insane. I would be upset too if I went and bought this land and I'm like watching the land I bought with my creek on it. Mm-hmm. Like,
I've seen it. It just.
And nothing. There's no way, because they're competing with each other. There's no way for the water to just stay or come back.
Well, the water. So it goes down, and it comes back.
Yeah.
So it's like when they were pumping with this one pump,
it
would go down, and then it would come back up when they weren't. So that he was able to remedy his issue by getting them to stop using that pump.
Oh wow. Okay.
But that just took a lot of time and energy.
Yeah, it did.
And probably some money that.
Yeah.
We wouldn't all have.
Yeah, exactly. Some money that we would not have, and I'm sure like whoever sold him the land didn't even know to probably talk about that.
No,
have that conversation.
Yeah.
Wow.
So it's spotty where anybody's like had an egregious thing like that happen, but it's definitely an issue that affects the whole state if we're not managing our water. And it's just a matter of time before farmers are already recognizing that they can't rely on just rain like they have in the past because our weather patterns are changing and things, rain falls all at once, or then it goes for weeks without raining at all. And there's a whole thing called the Alabama Irrigation Initiative where universities are trying to, and Extension and Soil and Conservation are trying to work with farmers to incentivize incentivize irrigation, but also kind of teach them how to do it in the right way, but without like totally, because irrigation can be damaging too. You can use a lot of water and you can pollute water. So they're trying to create a system of irrigation that is sustainable, but everybody's not participating in that. Big commercial corporate farmers are going to just irrigate,
right?
And we just need to all figure out how we're going to manage it when we do find times of shortage. And it's it's not rocket science. It's just it just
hard.
takes time and planning and investment.
Right.
And then on the flip side of that, and maybe you're going to ask this question, this is all climate intertwined. While we're planning these big long-term policy changes that we need for addressing climate change, we also have to address the impacts that are happening right now.
Yeah.
And people are getting impacted right now. It's not tomorrow. It's not in 50 years. Like these
right now.
These flooding and storms and our infrastructure that is not built resilient. It's not even adequate in a lot of places. Not most, but a lot of places.
Yeah.
is, these are the things we're working on that we have to work on right now to help people deal with what's happening to them right now.
Yeah.
While we figure out these long-term things.
That's real. Ooh. It's a lot I did not know, and it's just like it's so mind-boggling, and it's just mind-boggling. So, what are some of the, I guess, like success stories that you all have been a part of along this journey of trying to get people to see the light and have a plan for our water?
Well, I mean, I think our movement is one of the biggest success stories. I mean, when we were started, as I mentioned, by some river groups that started in the 90s, and they saw a need for this whole statewide movement to come, and we have over 100 organizations in our network now.
Oh, wow.
And
What? What?
And
I love that.
It's not like
I love
a formal,
that.
like you don't have to pay us money to be a member. It's not it's like if you share our values and you want to protect Alabama's water,
let's do it.
You're part of our network.
Yeah.
And we have an Alabama Water Rally is our annual conference where we bring everybody together that wants to come together for a weekend and learn about emerging issues and network and celebrate. And we are up to like 150 people at that event.
What is it?
Representing over 50 organizations.
I love that. When I missed that, I did miss that. I remember missing that because I think I told you I wanted to come
every March. Not always the same weekend, but we do it every March, somewhere mid to late March.
Okay.
And we'd love to have you there.
Yeah, I'm gonna come this year. if it's available, I'm gonna come for sure.
So another great success story is I'll give some of these sort of programmatic successes I think are worth talking about, and then I'll give maybe some issue successes that we've had, because we do have success, and the Alabama environmental community is scrappy, but we do have some successes that are worth celebrating. So, but programmatically, we also operate the Southern Exposure Documentary Film Program, which was started by another organization in the Southern Environmental Law Center, but then after 5 years, they weren't going to continue it, and we really felt like it was just important for this community to have this and for our state to have this, and they were gracious enough to let us take it over, and we've had it since 2018. And it is a documentary film fellowship program, so we bring in filmmakers that are professional filmmakers, either they're graduated from graduate school or they're in early careers somewhere usually, and from all over the country. They come to Alabama for 6 weeks in the summer. We pay for them to live here, we give them a stipend. We work with our partners all over the state to come up with topics and that are relevant and important, and they create short documentaries, like 15 to 20 minutes long, 4 to 5 of them every summer.
What?
About Alabama's environment, the issues, the people, the places. And this has been, and then once they're made, they're free, and so we screen them all over the state. They're free online for people to use and look at and watch. We show them to legislators and other decision makers that if they're relevant to the issue that we're advocating. And we have, these films have been great for engaging Alabamians in their environment if they can't get out into it, but also in just these complicated issues we've been talking about. It's really hard sometimes to just delve into them and figure out where you can engage. And we try to have an advocacy action alongside each topic in each film if it's relevant to that. And
I love that.
We've had some great successes using the films.
Yes.
So the Cahaba Beach Road was a good one. There was a road that was going to be built close to the drinking water supply over the Cahaba. Advocates didn't want it, and some of the community didn't want it. We created this film. They used that to educate more of the community. The road has still not been built.
That's good. Yes, that's good. Yes.
There was another drinking water film around on Lake Purdy and the land around Lake Purdy, which is drinking water for Birmingham.
Where's Lake Purdy? I'm not familiar.
It's in Shelby County, kind of off of 280.
Okay.
And it's a reservoir that the Birmingham Water Works owns, but they have it for water supply for like probably hundreds of thousands of people in the Birmingham area and south.
Okay.
And so there's all this land around it that's undeveloped, and there's supposed to be a conservation easement on it, because the best way to protect a body of water is to not have development around it, is to have like forest that's gonna and natural lands that are going to catch the water and filter it before it gets into your drinking water. So advocates were advocating that they honor that easement that they had put on it years ago, and they just weren't complying with it, and they wanted it to be a little more honored and a little more concrete. And we made a film about that, and they worked it out. I mean, I think they did have to sue the waterworks, but,
Are you serious?
they did settle it out, and they worked it out so that water is protected now for for the future.
Yeah.
So there's a bunch more I can think of, or I can't think of right now, that we've used for films. There's another really big win that happened recently, and we don't get really big wins very often, so I do want to mention it. So we talked a lot about dams and Alabama Power and all these things. So Alabama Power was aiming to build a hydro pump storage facility on Chandler Mountain. Chandler Mountain is up just north of Birmingham, in a rural
build a
community.
what? Hold on, what?
I'll explain in a minute what that is.
A hydro pump.
Hydro pump storage is
Okay.
So one of the things that I think utilities are definitely going to have to do as they move to renewables like solar, they're going to have more battery storage or more storage for power.
Okay.
Because it won't be, if the sun happens to not be shining, you have to be able to store that power and use it when you need it, because it's not as consistent. Although the sun's pretty consistent in Alabama, and they try to say it's not, but there's some things, some reality that the fact they're going to have more storage for power, which we think of as battery, but there's other ways to store electricity, and water is one of those. And pump storage is a system where there's a reservoir here and a reservoir high, a reservoir low, and they pump the water up, and they somehow, I don't know all the scientific details of how it creates energy, and it enables them to store it so they can use it when they need it. So this proposal was going to create was going to require 5 new dams, create 2 reservoirs on top of Chandler Mountain. Chandler Mountain is a rural area. It's got some beautiful untouched forest and homes and drinking water wells or supply for one community. Tomato farms that are really good, huge tomato farms that migrant workers are employed on, indigenous lands. You may have heard of Horsepins 40. It's a big bouldering area. So the community was like, no way. We don't want them to just come. They were just going to put a big lake on top of the mountain, but they weren't going to be able to use the lake because it'll be going up and down all the time.
No.
And they were just going to have these big structures behind their homes.
That's moving people. That's displacement.
Yeah, and it's multi-generational lands. So the community organized like crazy. They were so good. They apparently have organized and fought some other things before. So they were awesome. And we, having participated in federal Energy Regulatory Commission processes, knew kind of how that process worked, because that's who was going to have to license this thing.
Yeah.
And Coosa Riverkeeper was in their watershed, so they got on board. And so all of us, worked together and Energy Alabama is another group that was on board. We worked together as a coalition with the community groups to fight this facility. And it ended up, to our surprise, because they don't back down easily that I've ever seen.
Yeah.
But Alabama Power pulled their, after a couple of huge community meetings, the 300 people showed up to 2 different public meetings, and a lot of outcry. They pulled their application for it.
And we're not going to do
it. Now, they may be looking at somewhere else. They may, we're always kind of waiting for the next shoe to drop, but it was a great, especially a great testament to the community and how well they organized, and all of us and our partners, coalescing together. So.
I absolutely love that. No, you can't come here. You cannot come here and mess up my land.
And it also kind of speaks to the idea that we have to all be thinking about as we move towards renewable energy, because there's a fight in Montgomery right now over a solar a company that's trying to put a solar entity in. Some people near there don't necessarily want it. I think they're probably not informed enough about what it will do. I think it's a good thing, and I've talked to the people that want to put it in. Yeah. And it's supposed to help provide some of the power for the Meta data center. And it's on farmland, and they're going to protect the wetlands. They seem to be doing everything in a good way, and they're going to actually have sheep grazing underneath the solar panels to create a regenerative agriculture project at the same time. Really? And anyway, but there's still opposition because people just aren't aware of what these things are, and there's a lot of education that has to happen. And I just think we're having to think about, as an environmental community, what are the renewable energies that we can support, and what and what are the storage options for power that we can support, and what are we going to have to just stand up against for our waterways, for our people, for communities and land and things like that. And So it's a tough choice. There
It
may be
is.
some trade-offs that we don't like, but
Yeah.
we need to, I think if we can come together and kind of have an understanding of those things, and it will be a lot more successful at getting the energy future that we want.
Indeed, yeah. I remember growing up in elementary school. It was like this thing at AUM. You may know what I'm talking about. It was like a water camp or something where all the schools would come together.
Was it a
and we learned
groundwater
about-
festival?
Maybe. Was
Yeah,
it
they
a
still
day?
have those.
They still had. Okay, so do y'all participate in those, or like what does
We
that look
don't,
like?
We don't do much with formal education, like
Okay.
like K through 12.
Yeah.
Those are actually done by the extension services, which are in every county.
Okay, okay.
Alabama Extension Office. And they teach you about groundwater, and they show you like the groundwater level.
Yes, and we had to create our own infiltration system,
Yep,
and like
yep.
I used to love going to those because I don't know, I got to see like other folks from different schools that I knew, and like it was just a good time. And
Yeah,
like
I don't know if AUM still does it, but a lot of counties do those, and then the schools will go, and some of the local watershed groups will participate in those in their community.
Yeah.
Again, we don't do as much with educating children because there are a lot of those. To me, that's really better done by the local group.
yeah,
They know what's going on in their community, in their watershed. And since we're kind of at that, I always say, I kind of joke, we're at that 201 level. Like once you come in with the local group, then you start to kind of see how it all fits into a broader movement and what's going on at the state level. And then hopefully you'll come to Water Rally and get involved in the bigger picture stuff too.
Yeah.
But we always kind of want you to start local because that's
Start
where
local.
it all starts.
Yeah, I love that. 2 more questions. A lot of this that you talked about has just been, I don't even want to say low key. I think all of it is connected to power in some sort. And that power is obviously within our votes. So can you just talk about, I know you're a 501c3, but can you talk about the role like civic engagement plays into this work?
Absolutely. That is a big part of our strategies for how we do our work is to engage people in government and in democracy and government, in their local government and their state government in particular, because these are where the decisions are made. And we have a lot of programs that we want. Like, for example, our big strategic plan right now. I mean, I guess over the years we've been working in different ways in the environmental community, and a lot of our early work was on making sure the Clean Water Act was getting implemented and enforced, and focusing kind of on that the permits that polluters get to discharge into our water, and sort of really focus regulatory reforms. And actually, a lot of the riverkeepers are kind of covering that base now, which frees us up at the state level to focus more on legislative. And we've been kind of engaging in the legislative work to try to understand more what decisions that they can make, because environmental laws often come from the federal government through the EPA, and then they get implemented at the state level. Mm-hmm. But there are a lot of things that the state can do, the state legislature can do, that helps improve our ability to, they can't necessarily change the Clean Water Act or anything like that, but they can go above the floor, right?
Yeah,
Everything
absolutely.
at the federal level is the floor.
Absolutely.
So we can make it better, but they can also make, they can do things that affect local communities, and they can do things that put more pressure on, or give more power to agencies and give more funding to agencies to be able to regulate these things and to do the work they do. And right now, our agencies are very weak, and part of that weakness is because they're so underfunded. Our legislators and our political leaders have said, we don't want to invest in protecting the environment. And they hear that, and they're like, okay, we'll do the best we can. But and I'm not saying they're always doing the best they can either.
Yeah,
but there's just this political will that's not there. So legislators can change that too. But there's also laws we can get done so that can make things happen faster than if it's coming from the federal government. So we've got a program now we just started called All Stars, Alabama Special Trained Advocates for Rivers.
Okay.
And we are training a group. This is our inaugural group. We're just starting out to train people to get more engaged in talking to their legislators. And
I love
get
that.
to know them.
Absolutely.
And we've got our strategic plan is about building those relationships with legislators
Absolutely.
outside of the session.
Absolutely.
Like, not just when I come to you with a bill. I want you to have seen me before that.
Yep.
Know that I'm your neighbor. That I'm voting in your constituency. And that I care about these issues, because the one thing we learned in this, in this presidential election, and it's every it's every case in the local elections and state elections, the environment takes a back seat.
Yep.
Voters never say that it's one of their top issues. Yet if you ask someone specifically, do they care about protecting their river, their clean water, or their air in their community, they're going to say yes. And they even, most of the time, the polls will say that they want more regulation or they believe in putting more money toward it. But it's just not coming out in votes. And so we really talk a lot about and work a lot on getting people engaged with their government officials and not being intimidated by them or cynical. We have to fight cynicism all the time.
All the time.
Because it feels like their voices aren't going to be heard because they don't have money or they're not a big corporation. But we've got to debunk that because the only way we're going to be heard is if we're louder.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
that's what we want we want people to feel comfortable doing that. But also in Alabama, it's all about relationships. And
it is.
if they don't know us, then when somebody says these crazy radical environmentalists just want to tear down all the dams or just want to, stop business from happening, then they're going to believe it because they haven't talked to us.
They haven't had a conversation.
I was born in Alabama. I was raised in Alabama. I was public school educated in Alabama from kindergarten through master's degree. My dad played football at Auburn. I'm an Alabamian. There's just there's nothing about me that's not, but it doesn't mean I can't be an environmentalist too.
Right, exactly. There's nothing about you that's not, and it don't mean that you can't be an environmentalist too. See? I'm actually glad that you brought up just other people diving into more of this fight because I want to know what are some practical steps folks can take to just show up in this space and what that looks like.
Well, so I think one of the best things you can do is find out if you have a local group in your community or your watershed. And you can go to our website and find that out, alabamarivers.org. We have a list of all of our network partners. If you don't see one on there, call us because we start groups too.
Yeah.
We're working right now in Montgomery to start a Friends of the Alabama River. Believe it or not, there's never been one in Montgomery.
And I got a lot of questions about Alabama River. We didn't even get to talk about that, but
that's another great success. Well, it's not a success yet, but it's moving toward a success.
Okay, what?
Well, so we talked about the mussels and the species that we have.
Yeah.
There are 2 dams on the lower Alabama River that are right before you get to Mobile Bay.
Okay.
One's Miller's Ferry and one's Claiborne.
Okay.
So up above Miller's Ferry, the first one, is where the Cahaba comes into the Alabama River.
Wait, is this the ferry that you take where G's Bend is, or did I go too far?
No, I think that is that.
Oh, that's the same ferry.
I think so, yeah. But Miller's Ferry is the name of the dam.
Oh, okay.
But I think it's in that area.
Okay.
Where it got its name. But
okay.
But the dam is Miller's Ferry and the dam is Claiborne.
Okay.
And then just upstream from Miller's Ferry is where the Cahaba River comes into the Alabama River.
Okay.
So you remember all those fish that are in the Cahaba River?
Yes.
And all the species there. And Alabama has a lot of them too. Well, there's a whole bunch of fish in Alabama that used to spend their time there's the need to spend their time in the Gulf of Mexico and then swim upstream into freshwater to spawn and live and do their things.
Yeah.
And they also these fish act as host fish for mussels. Freshwater mussels have to have a fish host in order to complete their reproductive cycle. Oh. So this is nature. It's very, complicated, but it's cool.
Right.
So they can't get upstream anymore.
Oh, no.
Because of those dams. So once those dams are built, some of those fish, some of them were still in the system, but we have mussels in the Cahaba that are 40 years old that are not reproducing. They're gonna die out.
Oh my goodness!
And because their host fish can't get upstream anymore.
They're becoming extinct.
And so biologists in Alabama and groups started looking at how can we get fish past these dams so that out west they get tons of money. This is another thing we don't get in the South. There's a bunch of money from the federal government to do things like this. Probably because our leaders aren't advocating for it. But out west, they get a bunch of money for the salmon. They have one species, the salmon, that does this. It lives in the ocean and comes upstream. And, indigenous people need this food supply, and there's big industries for salmon. So they have been taking down whole dams just to get the salmon where they're supposed to, get their habitat and stuff back. But in Alabama, it's more like dozens of species. It's not just one.
Yeah.
And we don't necessarily have the drivers of the industries and there are some, but the Gulf sturgeon was a big part of indigenous people's lives and the food supply in the past. But of course we don't put as much emphasis on those things, unfortunately, in Alabama that help, that work with what indigenous people have lost.
Wow.
But so there's fish passage is something that happens where you don't take down the whole dam, but you can find ways to get the fish past the dam.
Yeah.
So, but the Army Corps of Engineers agreed to do a feasibility study on these 2 dams because they own these 2 dams to see about how to get fish past them.
Millis Ferry and Claiborne. Okay.
And it would take a non-federal match of $1.5 million in order for them to agree to do that. Well, little old Alabama Rivers Alliance doesn't have $1.5 million.
Yeah.
Or the ability to get it. But thankfully, the Nature Conservancy in Alabama is a much bigger organization. They're connected to their big international Nature Conservancy. And so they were able to make that commitment. And
Wow.
the Army Corps has been studying that for the past 3 years. And their preferred option they've come up with is to build a natural bypass channel around the dams. So it's basically like another little river, another little creek
Wow.
around the dams. And they have to do there's a lot of biologists from Auburn and the state that are working on, like, how do we do this in a way that's going to attract the fish, make sure they go into the channel.
Right.
And do what they're supposed to do. But it's really exciting and it's possible. It still has to be approved by Congress at this point, and that's still a big if. But there's advocates trying to get Congress to. The Nature Conservancy has a little bit stronger ability to lobby at the federal level with their bigger organization, and so hopefully this will happen. It'll still take a lot of time.
Yeah.
And of course, we would have loved to have just said, let's take the dams out. They're not really, there's no navigation on the Alabama River. That's what the dams are there for. They have locks on them so that ships and barges and things can go through, but there's no navigation on the Alabama River for almost 20 years now. And so
there's really no need
not
for
really
if
a
we're
need. There's a
being
little
honest.
hydropower on Miller's Ferry, but we could figure out that. But they took dam removal off the table right away, and that's a very big political lift in Alabama to get big dams like that taken out.
Yeah.
There's definitely some progress on smaller dams, but not on the big ones.
Yeah.
So, but we're still happy with the choice of. We're so excited about the idea of fish passage channels if they can make it happen. So keep our fingers crossed and keep advocating to our Congress people that this is a project that needs to happen. It would be the largest ecological reconnection
That's
happened in
That's
this country
insane.
in a long, long time.
That's insane. Happening right here in Alabama.
If it works.
And people don't even know.
Yeah.
Dang. Okay, so how can the people keep up with you? I know you plugged your website in.
Yeah,
Plug it one more time.
AlabamaRivers.org is our website. And, we can help you figure out if you've got a local group. We can help you start getting engaged with local legislative and local governments and all that. We provide things like the Southern Exposure film screenings. You can come to one of those in a community nearby you, hopefully. And those are all on our website as well. You can go to southernexposurefilms.org if you just want to watch some of those and start learning about the issues. You can search them by keyword if you got an issue that you're particularly interested in and see if there's a film about it.
Okay.
And you can come to Alabama Water Rally and get to know all the folks that are working in this space and
Absolutely.
really start to feel like you're part of the movement. Any of these options, we also have a Zoom series called Water is Life, a talk series that we try to do roughly once a month, and it's sort of like this where we talk with partners and experts on different issues.
Yeah.
We're going to have one with ADEM next week about with Alabama Department of Environmental Management about what's going on with the infrastructure dollars for drinking water and wastewater, and get an update on that.
Wow.
So there's a lot of ways to get engaged. At the very early phase, just go to a cleanup. Get out there with a local group or with just some friends and go pick up trash on the river. There's so many ways to get engaged. But if policy and advocacy is your thing and you're fed up, definitely look us up because we want to plug you in and we can help you find where it is that's going to make you feel like you're part of it.
Yeah. I love that. Well, Cindy, thank you so much for coming on
This
the
has been
South Got
fun.
Something to Say. Yeah. Because you had something to say, I had something to say, we had something to say.
That's
For
right.
the South.
That's right. The South has got something to say.
For sure. For sure. All right, guys. Thank you so much. And until next time, bye.